So, Trev, that gets us into point show segment 3. Can the defense really keep this going? I mean, that's the question, right, Trevor? It's great that you've done what you've done the last 3 games, but you're at the point now where it's like you look at this team and you're like, you think about everything they're missing on defensively, and you look at what's coming up. That's a question that is going to also play a large role, because if the offense improves but the defense regresses, then it's kind of a wash. Can the defense remain? Because I don't think they need to play better. They just need to keep doing what they've done. It's asking a lot for a team that's lost as much as this team has lost. All-American, because the difference between what the offense has lost and what the defense has lost is the offense lost a lot of potential in Charles Jagusah and Ashton Craig. Those guys had 7 career starts between the two of them. By the time they were both done, Jagusah had 1 career start. Ashton had 3 last year, 3 this year before he got hurt. Defense lost an All-American cornerback. They lost a 5th-year senior, multi-year starting defensive end. And then the guy that they lost in Boubacar Traore is an elite talent. You know, Jason Onye is playing at a high level. I mean, there were people that were arguing early in the season that Jason Onye should have been taking snaps away from Riley Mills. And I disagreed with it because from the standpoint of you need to get Riley going, but the argument as far as that based on who was playing better, that was a fair argument to make. You know what I mean? He's gone. And you look at this team and you're like, and they just keep handling business. Are they at that point now, Trevor, where the lack of depth is such because of the injuries that they can or can't sustain it the last 4 games? I think that's going to be something to keep an eye on down the stretch and into the postseason.
Yeah. You want to talk about the importance of recruiting and developing young guys. Notre Dame's defense is case in point for that, right? It's so much of an overused phrase of, next man in. And we've seen that before at Notre Dame. It's like, oh, well, just next man in. And before, the talent gap was steep, to put it lightly. When, your premier guy goes down and the guy filling in just doesn't, it's not there, right? Now you could make the argument that, you lose an All-American like Ben Morrison, which is just, there is no scenario where that's good, right? Like there's no, right? Like I'm not here to try to say, but at least. But
Benjamin Leonard Moore's really good. Yeah. And wouldn't you love to have him and Benjamin Morrison? Yeah. There's no spinning this as it's a good thing. There's none.
No. But through the development of the young guys, looking at the defense as a whole, I think that is offsetting the injuries that are happening to this side of the football, right? You have on the defensive line, you lose a guy like Jordan Botelho, who was probably playing his best season up to that point before he got injured in a Notre Dame uniform. You lose just an elite pass rushing talent in Boubacar Traore. You lose your All-American corner. Jack Kaiser gets banged up for a little bit in the middle of the season against Louisville. So how are you going to offset those things? One, the speed and athleticism of this defense is unmatched. It's probably from top to bottom, it's probably the fastest and longest Notre Dame defense that I've seen in my lifetime across the board. And 2, the younger guys' development is really starting to balance out the amount of injuries that they have right now. The one bigger question mark that I do still have is Leonard Moore. And it's not for a lack of faith in him as a player. It's who he has to replace. Because you look at the secondary, you look at that cornerback room. Brian, you said it a couple weeks ago. Christian Gray went from being, I'm the young, up-and-coming, exciting new guy to, hey, now you're just the guy. You're him. You're it. And now Leonard Moore, as a true freshman, is now going to be that young, stud, exciting, up-and-coming guy. And so that's going to be my biggest question mark. Defensive line, in my opinion, is deep enough. And they did a good job of getting a guy like Bryce Young a decent amount of reps early enough that you can kind of supplement a little bit. But the cornerback room is going to be my biggest question mark. It is.
It's fair. You literally cannot sustain another injury. You can't.
No.
I mean, you can't afford another injury at that position. You did that. And that really, to me, is the interesting thing. It's like there's people in the chat talking about Junior Tuihalamaka. And you talked about they got Bryce Young some reps early. They got Junior Tuihalamaka 0. He literally did not play a defensive snap all season until Jordan Patel got hurt. And look how he's played. Josh Burnham misses a month of the season because of an injury. He comes back and he's one of your best defensive linemen. I mean, it is impressive to see that. It really is impressive to see that. And here's the crazy thing. In the first 5 games of the season when the defense played great, going into the bye week, the defense was giving up 12.6 points per game. Do you know how many points per game, Trevor, they're giving up now? It's 12.1. Do you know why? Because in the last 3 games, they've held opponents to 11.3 points per game. Notre Dame in the first 5 games of the season was giving up 284 yards per game on the season. Notre Dame is now giving up 282.9 yards per game. That's less. Why? Because in the last 3 games, they've given up 281 yards per game. In the first 5 games, they gave up 4.4 yards per play. In the last 3 games, they're giving up 4.6 yards per play. It's the only number that's gone up, and it's gone up small. So essentially, what does that mean? It means the defense has been just as dominant the last 3 games as it was the first 5, despite all those injuries. Like that's my thing. Like we're talking about, the O-line coach has done the best job of any assistant because of look at what he's handled with all the guys that he's lost. And I'm thinking, are you kidding me? They're not terrible. No. Look at what they've lost on defense, and they're still lights out. Look at what Al Washington has lost from his defensive line, and they're still playing lights out. Look at what Mike Mickens has lost from his secondary, and they're playing lights out. Max Bull is playing a bunch of puppies and Jack Kaiser, and they're lights out, right? I mean, and it doesn't matter who they've lost so far. It's just good night, right? Like that's and somebody in the chat just said Christian Gray hasn't been as good as he was before the injury. I don't disagree. And yet their numbers are still the same exact overall as what they were before the bye. I mean, that's impressive. Now, the hope is, to Zach's point, that this time off they can figure out how to get Christian back on. I mean, he still played good football. He just hasn't been as good. And he's gotten a little grabby and some things like that. But can you get him back on track? And the thing is, right now, it's like you're finally getting that step up time from the veterans. That's really been a big key. And early in the season, Trev, an issue was your young players were balling out, and your veterans were disappointing. What's helped in the last 3 games, as you've gotten even younger, is your veterans are starting to ball out. Riley Mills, Howard Cross just keep playing great football. It started against Louisville. They were good against Louisville. Last 3 games, they played lights out. Riley Mills is currently playing the best football of his career. Can he keep that going for the final 4 games? Howard Cross is playing really good football the last few games. Can he keep that going in the last 4 games of the year? Josh Burnham has been really good the last 3 games. He's been fortunate that Notre Dame has played against 3 rushing teams. Can he be good against some of the teams like USC and some other teams that are more pass-oriented teams? Can he also provide an impact in the pass game? We don't know the answer to that because he hasn't been put in that situation yet. He did have one good pressure against Georgia Tech. So, getting Gabriel Rubio back's been huge. He's not a guy that's been able to kind of stay healthy for a period of time. Can he stay healthy this year? So those are all things to me that you say, and Xavier Watts has just been freaking phenomenal all year. Jordan Clark's been great all year. And he played, I was wrong. I said it, we didn't see him until the 3rd quarter. He actually did play a couple snaps in the 2nd quarter of that game. But you basically took off a guy off the field who's been one of your best players so far because he didn't fit the option, and you still did exactly what you've done all year, which is hold him to, keep the points down, and you blow the team out, right? RJ Oben's still struggling, but he's getting better. Can he finish strong? I mean, so there's enough of that, Trevor, to make me think that this defense has a chance to at least keep going as long as they can avoid further injuries. Because They have not reached their tipping point yet, but I think they're at that where they can't afford more. And then I think that does give them, okay, now you're at the tipping point. You can't afford to lose another DB. You can't afford to lose another D lineman, especially on the edge. You can't afford to lose one of your linebackers. I do think they're at that point now. I really do.
I think the biggest evaluation tool for me is going to be how the secondary plays against a team that can actually throw the football. And Blake Horvath's numbers were impressive. A lot of that was a lot of scheme based. I'm not going to say that he was some no talent guy that can't throw a football. I'm not saying that at all. But a team that resembles like a Louisville, right? Like maybe not as elite of a passing team with like a Ja'Cory Brooks and a Chris Bell.
You're saying like Blake Horvath's a dynamic player, but it is a very non-traditional offense.
Yes.
Your question is okay, how does that translate to more traditional offenses like USC is going to have, like Virginia's going to have, like Florida State's going to have?
Yeah.
Although it's a traditionally terrible offense.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, Stanford was, with their quarterback, a run-first team. Georgia Tech, with their quarterback, was more of a run-first team. Navy just is a run-first team, right? So I think a big evaluation tool for me is going to see pass rush and secondary, what that looks like against a team with a more traditional style of offense. And that's going to be kind of my indicator of, okay, what's that going to look like then once they get into the postseason and they have to potentially play a Clemson with Cade Klubnik, or a Miami with Cam Ward, or a Georgia with Carson Beck, or a Texas with Quinn Ewers. I mean, some of those guys that I listed off haven't had the most impressive season of all time. But the one thing that they all have in common is like they're traditionally a better passer than a non-traditional passing offense.
Right, like Navy and what Stanford certainly was. Like you see that? Did you see that game-losing interception that Daniels had against Wake?
Yeah,
awful.
Yeah.
A couple of those guys I wouldn't mind facing. A couple of those guys could be problems. But to your point, when you get to the playoff, you're going to have to play. I mean, we start thinking about the teams like right now, the way that I have, so I did, if you go to Irish Breakdown, I did a playoff projection yesterday, and it's looking at where teams are now, but then projecting how they're going to finish. And I had Notre Dame as the 7 seed and slated to play Miami in the first round. Well, that's a way different dynamic than what they face so far this season. Way different dynamic than what they face so far this season. And it's certainly way different than what they faced the last 3 games. And then if they win that game, they would then get, as the 7 seed, they would then get the 2 seed. And right now, my number 2 seed is Ohio State. And while I don't think their quarterback is anything to be impressed by, that receiving core certainly is. So it's a far different, pass game threats than what you faced outside of Louisville so far this season. And so that's where things get interesting. And that's where, okay, you're not going to have Benjamin Morrison. Okay, that means pass rush has to be better. It means the run defense has to be better. So it's going to be interesting, Trevor. But right now the question is going to be this: Can they maintain their level of play for the last 4 games? I think they're capable of it, and I think they will, as long as they don't have any further injuries. So then that raises the question: is there a chance they actually get better on defense in the final stretch of the season? Because here's the rub. The rub is, okay, you're really young and you've lost a lot of starters. That's reason number 1 for why you don't get better. You just hope that you stay. But the counter argument that is, yeah, you're really young, but you're really talented. And your youth is going to show, like, normally teams don't show huge improvement during a season unless there's like a new coach or something like that. Like teams do, but like individual players don't necessarily do that. But with Notre Dame on defense, like Zach Martin was bringing up Christian Gray not playing well. Well, young players tend to kind of do a little bit more of this. It would not shock me at all if Christian Gray comes out of the break and plays like he did at the beginning of the season. Right? He's a young guy. How does he handle being, missing practice? He didn't handle it as well as maybe a veteran would have. Well, now he gets another bye. He can come out. He can get better. I still think there's room for Drake Bowen to get even better, which is kind of crazy to think about, but he could get better. Kingston's going to get better. Jaden Osbury's going to get better. Leonard Moore's going to get better as he has more experience. You look at some of the younger guys. Bryce Young still has. So I think that's possible that they get better. My thing is, fine if you do get better, but just at the very least, just stay where you are. Just stay where you are. And that's the key. And what I'm impressed by with Al Golden is my fear, to be honest, is as we got deeper into the season and the younger players started having more experience, he was going to start loading a lot more on them. And he hasn't really done that. I mean, there's always new stuff going in every week because it's it's team opponent specific stuff. But he hasn't thrown like way more checks onto Drake and Kingston. And he's not asking them to do way more coverages with the younger DBs. He's like, look, we're going to adjust to our opponent, but it's still all about making sure that these kids can execute what we're asking them to do at a high level. And even against Navy, outside of 5-6 plays, they still did that. And so a lot of credit goes for him because Trevor, I'm telling you, as a coach, that is a very real thing. Okay, these guys got a lot. So we can do more now because my quarterback's got 7 games under his belt. You know what I mean? As a freshman, you know what I mean? Like that's a legitimate struggle that coaches have to do. And so far, Al Golden's done a really good job of that. It was like, look, it's more important that they play fast, that they play disciplined than I show everyone how smart I am by having 17 exotic coverage opportunities we have in this game. So the people look at me and say, hey, NFL D coordinator right there. And that's what I'm, has led to why I say I don't know that there's been a better coordinating job in college football this season than what Al Golden has done. When you consider, number one, just how dominant they are, just period, with no context, just a dominant defense. Like every metric that I've seen has their defense in the top 5, if not the top 3. But they've had to do it while facing real adversity. An offense that was sucked at the beginning of the year. All-American corners gone at the halfway point of the season. Patelho goes down in game 3. His replacement goes down in game 5. One of your top veteran senior interior defensive linemen off the team. And, oh, by the way, we're replacing all these guys with puppies, with young bucks, with, you know what I mean, with guys that have no experience. Just we're banking on the talent. The job that he's done to do that, and as I showed, the stats literally have not changed at all, and in more instances, they've gotten better. I mean, don't even get me started on comparing the rush offense now compared to what it was at the beginning of the season, even with the fact that they played a triple option team this past week. So it's a heck of a coaching job. It's just, can it get better? I almost feel like I'm asking too much to do that. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like I'm actually asking a little bit too much to say, hey, make it get better.
I think it depends on what lens you look at the defense getting better, right? Like, I don't know if they're going to get better than averaging 11.9 points per game. I just, that's hard for me to think about. Even with their opponents who are coming up next that we just previewed, 11.9 points a game to an injury-riddled, very young defense is a tall ask, right? But here's the thing. If you look at it at more of an individual level, I think this defense absolutely can get better. Because if you look at it and say, oh, Leonard Moore's just playing the best football he's going to play in 2024. Don't believe that for a second. Bryce Young is playing the best football that he's going to play in 2024. Not a chance. Drake Bowen is probably the closest to, because, I mean, if he just stayed this way for the rest of the season, I mean, that's a heck of a job by the first-time starter taking over from a 2.5, 3-year starter guy, J.D. Bertrand. Drake Bowen's played fantastic, but you could make that argument for a Don Shuler that, he's playing really good football. Is he playing the best that he's going to play in 2024? I don't think so. I don't think Kingston is. I don't think Jaden Osbury is. I don't think Christian Gray is. So at multiple different positions, at multiple different levels, there's guys at an individual level that will start to play better. Now, I don't know if that's going to inflect with now they're going to start only allowing 10 points per game. If they do, I mean, we're talking about Al Golden having done probably the greatest job ever as a defensive coordinator, given the injuries, right? But there's a lot of room for improvement still, which does give me hope that this defense can play better. I think it's going to be more of just watching them on the field than it is you go back and look at the box score and you look at the stats and the national rankings, say they got better in this category, in this category. I think it's going to be more watching it on the field.
Interestingly, about statistical categories, we pointed out where they've been. Here's a big thing. So one thing that we said going into the bye week last time was their run defense has to get better. Well, statistically, it hasn't. It's actually gotten worse statistically. This is why you need context. So in the first 5 games, Trev, they gave up 123.0 rushing yards per game.
Okay.
The last 3 games, they've given up 133 rushing yards per game. So if you just look at the numbers, it looks like, wow, you're giving up 10 more. They've actually gotten better. Number one, they're giving up 0.1 fewer yards per attempt. They were 3.6 the first 5. They're 3.5 now. But when you look at the context of the fact that one of those 3 teams was Navy, and when you look at Georgia Tech as the other, the context becomes very impressive because Notre Dame in the last 3 games is giving up 133 yards per game and 3.5 yards per carry on the ground against one opponent, against a schedule that has one opponent that currently averages 267 yards per game and 5.9 yards per carry, and another opponent during that same stretch that is averaging 176.8 rushing yards per game and 4.9 yards per carry. And the reason that they're that low is because of you.
Yeah.
Because you shut them down and held them to a season low. And you take the Notre Dame game out. Actually, I'm gonna do that here real quick. If you take the Notre Dame game out and you look at what Georgia Tech has done outside of the Notre Dame game, so they've played 9 games, so that divided by 8. They're averaging 190.9 yards per game outside of the Notre Dame game. So my point is that 133 may look like you're not as good as you were because you're giving up 10 more yards per game. But when you look at it in context of what those opponents have done on the course of the season, you realize like, wow, they did that against really good, 2 really good rushing teams. And that to me plays a big role in properly evaluating it, in my opinion. So I actually think it's gotten better. I think it's you played 2 of the 3 best rushing teams you're going to play all year, and you completely shut them down and held them. They held Georgia Tech over 100 yards below their season average. And if you look at what was Navy at last week, Trev, I know you did that. What were they, like 274
rushing yards?
I think going into last week, 274. Notre Dame held them to 222 in the game, right? Well, let's see here. Let's go to
they were 274.8 going into the Notre Dame,
and they held them to 222. So that's 52 yards below their season average. So it may look like, wow, you gave up 222 rushing yards. Yeah, to an option team that was averaging over 270, that's 52 yards fewer than their average. They were averaging, what was their yards per carry average going into that game, Trev? They were over 6, right?
Yeah.
And you held them to 5 point. Yeah, you held them to 5.2.
Like 7.2 or something. Yeah. Something nuts.
So let's see what Navy was. So coming into that game, they were, 1871 minus 222. So they had 1,649 rushing yards coming into the game on, let's see here, how many attempts they had 40 attempts against Notre Dame. So that's 236 attempts. So let's just do the math here real quick. So they were averaging, what did I say? 226, right? Coming into the game. 236 coming into the game, right? So that is 7 yards a carry. And now Notre Dame held them to 5.2. So again, context shows you that even though they're giving up more total yards right now, they're actually playing a lot better against the run than they had coming into the break. So that was the one concerning area for us with Notre Dame coming into the break on defense has actually gotten better.
Oh, yeah.
Now the question is there another level to get better? Like, it's going to be impossible for them to lower their yards per game rushing average, in my opinion, because they play Army. I mean, you could hold Army to 230 yards of rushing, and you say that's a dominant performance. A dominant. Because if you think Navy's good rushing the football, wait till you see Army.
Yeah.
Because as good as Navy was, Army's like 80 yards per game more because they don't throw it like Navy throws it.
Oh, yeah.
So, but that doesn't mean the overall play isn't as good.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if after the Northern Illinois game, you would have told me that Notre Dame's rush defense was going to hold Jamal Haynes to 15 rushing yards when they played Georgia Tech, I probably would have laughed in your face. And here we are after Notre Dame held Jamal Haynes to 15 rushing yards on 7 carries when they played. So the improvements are necessary, but I'm glad that you rattled off those stats and those comparisons, because that's a lot of what I was talking about. On paper, it might not look like they've gotten better, but they have gotten better. And I think that's what's going to be in store over this next 4-game stretch, Bryan. I really do.
Yeah. They have to me, it's about maintaining your level of play. That's going to be the key. And what goes into that. Injuries are obviously going to be part of that.
Sure.
And just continuing to it really is just this simple, Trevor. It's just keep doing what you're doing. I mean, you are young, you are banged up. That's all true, but that's been true for the last 2 games. If anything, I would argue that Notre Dame has actually added a little bit more than they lost in the last couple of weeks, right? Because you haven't lost anybody new. You lost Benjamin after the Stanford game, which stunk, but you got Josh Burner back. You got Gabriel Rubio back. So obviously you're a couple guys that were a little banged up are healthier now than they were. Yeah. And, it's just maintain it, man. Maintain it. That's going to be the big key on the defensive side of the ball. So, and we'll dive more into that. Obviously, we're not spending as much time on the defense because I don't know what else we can say. I mean, it's like they've just been so good this year on defense. I mean,
yeah. I mean, the way that I look at it, when I compare the offense and the defense, when I talk offensively, you're kind of asking them for more things.
Yeah.
Right. It's like you're asking to see more of this and more of this look. And for the defense, I don't know what more you can ask of a defense that's allowing 11.9 points per game through their last 3 games, right? Like I'm sure we could dive into it. It will start to get real nitpicky, like I would like to see the defense in the 3rd quarter with at least 11 minutes left do a better situation when they're in this and down in distance. And it just gets, do what you do. Just keep doing what you're doing. And Notre Dame's defense is so good that, and let me clarify, I know this is not the offensive mindset for Notre Dame, but Notre Dame's defense is good enough where there is a number that if the offense puts that up, they probably win. I believe that. Now, I know Mike Denbrock is not saying, all right, guys, as long as we can score 27 points a game, we'll be fine.
Yeah, or 21. I mean, they gave Louisville that last touchdown pretty much.
Sure.
Yeah, they would have defended that differently if it was a 21-17 game.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? But yeah, I mean, you're right. Like, guys, just get us to 21. That's all we need. But that's not the mindset, because if you can jump on a team early, it's like we saw against Navy. When Notre Dame's offense came out rolling, I really feel Navy's offense felt the pressure of now we have to score.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not a place that you want to be. Trevor, you want to hear something wild. So last year, Notre Dame's offense scored over 40 points per game in 9 of their 13 contests. And that includes 2 games with over 50 points. So that was an all-time record. Notre Dame's previous high of games of 40 or more points was 6, I believe. And they had 9 last year. This year, Notre Dame's scoring average has dropped about 3 points. And they've only scored over 40 points in 3 of their 7 games, or 3 of their 8 games so far. Notre Dame's last year average margin of victory was 23.3. The difference between Notre Dame's scoring offense and their scoring defense in a year where Notre Dame set an all-time scoring record. Notre Dame has never scored more points in a season a modern record. I think the 1913 or 1908 or something like that team had like 40-some points a game. But since World War II, no offense has scored more than what Notre Dame scored last year. Despite that, Notre Dame's gap between what they're scoring and what they're giving up has gone up over a point since last year. The difference between what they scored and what they gave up last year when Notre Dame had a really good defense was 23.3. This year, through 8 games, it's 24.5. So even though they're not having that record season like they had last year, there's still a bigger gap between what the opponents are scoring and what Notre Dame is scoring. That's impressive. That's really impressive.
That's nuts.
With a team that's very young and a defense that's very young and very banged up.
Yeah.
It really is impressive. And here's another crazy thing that I was thinking about, Trevor. Notre Dame has given up more than 16 points one time in their first 8 games. They have held 3 of their 8 opponents to single digits. They have held 6 of their 8 opponents to 14 points or less. And their starting defense has held 4 different opponents to single digits. When you consider like Georgia Tech scored on the backup defense in that game. Like that's, and you're playing a schedule that as a combined group has a winning record, which most teams in the top 25 have not. So I mean, when you look at that, you realize like that's really impressive. Like Clemson's opponents have a 24-30 record. Miami's are 25-29. Pitt's is 22-25. BYU is 28-28. Iowa State 24-24. Indiana's 23-32. Penn State's are 25-30. Texas A&M's got 33-22. Georgia's 26-21. Texas is 34-28. Tennessee's 23-24. So when you look at that and you say Notre Dame's done this against an opponent, against a schedule that has a winning record, and you say, well, that just adds a little bit more context to it. I think, A&M, Louisville, Georgia Tech, Navy. That's four. Half of their opponents have spent time ranked in the top 25 this year. It's pretty good. So, and it's been a lot to defense. And I'll say this: one thing that'll help the defense to continue playing well, Trevor, is if the offense can keep getting better and better. That's a huge part, because if there's not that same pressure on this team, because like you mentioned, like, hey, it's got to get 20 points. The reason that you can't have that mindset, and this is what you were saying, is you can't put that kind of pressure on any defense week after week, especially a young one. Like that's the thing, is this young team, it's like, okay, if it comes down to a fourth quarter and we got to make a stop, I mean, that's when youth may become a problem, maybe. Who knows? Okay, then don't let's not find out. And that's going to come down to your offense. Take some of that pressure off of them by getting off the fast starts, by continuing to score a lot of points, and then the defense can say, hey, guys, we don't have to be perfect all the time. Let's just keep doing what we do. Let's keep being fast. Because they are fast. Let's just keep being long because they are long. Let's just keep being talented because they are talented, and just do our jobs because we know the offense is going to go out there and hang 30-something on these guys, if not more.
Yeah. I mean, argument could be made that Notre Dame's offense, their last 4 games going back to the Louisville game, started out better than their defense did. And they're still only giving up X amount of points that you just pointed out, right? So the offense very much has a hand in how successful the defense can be. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, Trevor, my friend, that's going to do it. Now, I'll say this. Special teams, for the love of all things holy, y'all better figure some stuff out in the last 4 games.
Yep.
Because it's not good. Because the one thing Florida State's good at, special teams.
Yeah.
Got a great punter. They had a kick return that they took back for a score against Duke. Like, that's a dangerous team, special teams wise. And then you do some stupid stuff on that side of the ball, and all of a sudden, Florida State thinks they can stay in that game and make things interesting. Special teams is the one area that has been some – because if you look at the Fermo efficiency index, and I really like the stuff he does, so I like to use what he does. But if you look at the Fermo efficiency index, Trevor, here, let's pull this up here real quick. The Notre Dame offense, Notre Dame as a team right now is 6th overall on the FEI.
Okay.
Their offense has climbed all the way up to 15th. Their defense is number 2 behind Texas. Their special teams ranks, it's not even on the, I have to scroll down, 60th. That's a part that's going to have to get better. Sparta's going to have to get a lot better. If you look at the football power index, again, Notre Dame's offense has gotten a lot better. They currently are 7th overall. Their offense has climbed up to 23rd. They were like 50 not that long ago. Their defense is 3rd. Their special teams is 82nd. So that part of the game has got to get better. Got to get better. We'll see if it does. Getting like somebody said, Jeter back should help, but not having Mitch Jeter has not been the only problem with your special teams this season.
Nah, right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
yeah. The kickoff return game needs figured out in multiple different ways. Can't be muffin kicks. Can't be not returning kicks when you field it on the 10-yard line and you call a fair catch with nobody in sight. Special teams needs figured out. Coverage-wise, it's been decent. I will say, like, kickoff and punt coverage has been decent.
Yeah.
But as a whole, the unit needs figured out. Absolutely.
Yeah. Trev, why don't you take us out of here, man?
You got it. Well, thank you guys for being with us today for pretty close to 2.5 hours here. A lot of fun stuff that we're going to get into throughout the week. We're going to continue to break down Notre Dame's bye week. And in order to keep track of everything that we do, make sure you hit that like button, that subscribe button, hit the notification bell for when you know Bryan and I go live. Share this podcast with friends and family. Leave us a 5-star review. Bryan has an awesome run game breakdown coming out. And the only way you're going to be able to check that out is if you go to boards.irishbreakdown.com. So until tomorrow, that's Bryan. I'm Trev. We'll see you back here again tomorrow at 1 o'clock.